people think about toxic masculinity, that is what I think about, is energy that is used as force that's destructive. Not all masculinity is toxic in nature. No. In fact, most masculinity is strong in nature because it comes from a place of power, which I believe comes from your heart. But the problem is a lot of guys are afraid to go there, even if they don't need to share with anyone else. If they were isolated in a room and they were asked to go into their heart, I don't know if that many people would know how to do that or be willing to, because they might be afraid of what they see. I've been there. I was afraid to go into the depths of my heart to see what was there, and what I realized was I was afraid of the power that I would acquire from connecting with my heart, because I was worried that my ego would take it for granted and use it for destruction.
Welcome to the Cardinal Way for Men. My name is Ed Cardinal, and this is the Next Man Up, transformative, candid conversations with men. And it is a pleasure to have Thomas here with me this evening. And I met Thomas through a mutual friend, and on Fridays we sometimes get together at a cigar lounge here in Asheville at Casablanca, and that's actually where we're recording today. So pleasure to have you on Thomas, and looking forward to having a conversation with you. That my mission is to help men. Help men get healthier emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and I know that we've had some conversations here at the Cigar Lounge that kind of tap into all of those different aspects of our health. So I thought you'd be a great person to interview.
Thanks, man.
So you're of Jamaican American descent, or Jamaican descent, but what generation?
So I'm first generation American born.
Okay.
And everyone else in my family is from Jamaica.
Okay.
Yeah.
Culturally, what does it mean to be a man in the Jamaican culture? How did that influence you?
Growing up, it was more on the macho side, right? So I didn't hear things like man up or be a man in the house. It wasn't really like that. That was more like in grade school growing up. But at no point do we talk about our feelings. We don't talk about our feelings. We don't cry. We are always supposed to just move forward. That was basically the message I got.
Move forward.
Just move forward, right? And I also was very impressionable. I wanted to make my parents proud. So their programming for me was very industrial age of just get an education, go get a job, save money, buy a house, like the original blueprint of the American dream, if you will, right? And so all I wanted to do was please them in that way. But the idea of expressing emotion, going in and sharing with them what was going on with me, they didn't want to hear that. They just said, don't worry about that. Focus on your education. Everything will work itself out. Didn't really work out that way, but I just have to imagine that was the information that was given, that was passed along to them, right? That they hadn't been passed along to me.
Absolutely.
The only difference is I didn't live in that world, right? I lived in the world that we live in today, and so those principles, while pretty structured, that was not the path that was designed for me in this world,
right? And those are similar sort of messages that I got in our culture.
Yeah.
I mean, you were raised in the United States, but you still had some of that the Jamaican cultural conditions.
Yeah, I mean, Caribbean cultures in general are very strict and very education focused. So if I came home with an A, it was like, why? What happened to the A+? It was kind of like that. And my parents just really wanted me to succeed. They wanted me to thrive and be in a good position to make it here. Because their plan was to give my sister and I a great life and then go back home.
Okay.
They weren't trying to stay here. They wanted to make money, go back home to Jamaica. That was their plan, and that's pretty common in Caribbean households. Anyone who immigrates out here, they're trying to go back, because that's where they want to be, but they can't make that type of living there than they could here.
Right.
So there was a lot of that as well, So it was just totally different paths that were kind of set up for me that I had to tiptoe along.
So that those messages you got about what it means to be a man, how did that negatively impact you as you got older? How did that show up for you?
The need for validation,
Yeah.
right? I was constantly trying to be inclusive or be included. I wanted to belong somewhere. And I really did focus on my academics. I mean, I was top of my class up until 5th grade. My favorite teacher retired suddenly, and I kind of lost my way because he was also a mentor of mine.
Mm-hmm.
He was giving me guidance when I was still being bullied and made fun of because I was so smart, because black people aren't supposed to be smart, apparently, right? If you are, you're a geek. And so I was made fun of a lot growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And when I lost that direction, I felt like I was on my own and I needed to survive. And I wasn't treated respectfully. And the idea, the programming of being a man meant trying to be cool, trying to dress a certain way, talk a certain way, act a certain way, not care about school, So I did those things. Not well. And that then backfired as well, because now not only did I ostracize myself from the nerds and the geeks, I wasn't cool enough to be with the cool people, right? So then I just ended up being by myself, and that was the loner path that I ended up taking almost all the way through high school.
Okay.
So the idea of trying to figure out how to be me with the other side of being masculine and being attractive, because once the girls got into the picture, all bets were off. Right? And so trying to figure that out and make my way through that, it was really challenging, and I didn't have, my parents are still together. I love my dad. He just wasn't there to have those conversations with me at the time that I needed it, and my mom has no idea what it's like to be a man, so she couldn't really give me any other support other than just stay focused in school, focus on your academics.
Yeah. I don't know if your dad's anything like my dad, but my dad didn't know how to have those conversations with me. He was I'm a very sensitive, emotional man. I was a sensitive, emotional boy, but that wasn't accepted by him. I was seen as a sign of weakness, but underlying it all, that's the way he is.
Yeah.
That's the way he is.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't fostered by his father. So I couldn't have, like you, I couldn't have those conversations because he didn't know how to be vulnerable and express his emotions.
Yeah, I don't know I think my dad, if I talk to my dad today, my dad and I have a great relationship today.
Yep.
And we share, and we speak in emotion, right? And so I think because of that, we have a deeper connection. Back then, I think neither of us knew how to have the conversation.
Right.
I didn't know how to bring it up with him because I looked up to my dad, and my dad was this very stern, stoic, I wouldn't say from a stoicism perspective, but just stoic as in just not a lot of emotion. And he just did what he had to do to keep us all together and a roof over our head, and I admire that. But there was a lot of that was missing that I just didn't get in those development years. But I also would say today I'm able to get a lot of that with him now because we're able to talk about those things. I'm able to share with him what's going on, and I'm getting a little bit from him too. So it's really nice.
Yeah. When did that change?
It changed when I started to talk to him about my struggles with alcohol and the trouble that I got myself into due to my excessive drinking and drug use. And so once I think I was maybe 8 months sober, I figured, it's time for me to share with them what's been going on. It's not that I could totally isolated myself from them, but I never told them what was going on. I mean, they were in Jamaica, I'm out in California, I'm kind of on my own, and little did I know that they were always worried about me, but when I then really told them what was going on, they just were shocked, but I knew one of the things that I wanted in terms of being sober was also to tell the truth, right? And tell the truth to them, so they can decide what they wanted to do, But also just to let them know that, I can take care of myself, And I found a way to get help, and being in recovery is amazing, and I have a great support group. And I think that was one of the things that they were afraid of the most when I moved out west, because I didn't have there's no family out west. Right. So they were just really worried that, if I were to stray from my path that I would just be on my own, and it happened, right?
Yeah.
Their worst case scenario did happen, but I'm super grateful that I had to go down that path to get where I am today. Absolutely. And have those conversations with them. Right. So my mom is still sensitive to those type of things, and so I kind of pick and choose what content to share with her. But my dad, I can have that conversation, and also probably because he also worked in mental health.
Okay.
And so he was around a lot of people who had issues with drug and alcohol abuse, and so me sharing it almost felt ironic in a way, because I should have talked to him about it sooner, because he would have understood, But I was just afraid that he would reject me, because that program was still there even as a kid, that if I don't show up as the person that they wanted me to be, that would be that would sever our relationship. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They must have been relieved on some level that you were getting help.
Yeah.
And that you're sober and clean. And,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think that, going back to your question, that changed the trajectory of our relationship, my dad and I, because now we were able to talk about anything. Right. And we were able to share stories and nothing crazy, but just to kind of share with him where I'm at in a deep, intimate way, right? Like very transparent. And then to hear his feedback and his reflections in that similar way, it's just amplified our relationship.
Take me through the process when you did get sober, and I can speak for myself. I've been sober, a long time, like you have, and the messages that we got growing up, that you're not supposed to express emotions, you're not supposed to cry, you're not supposed to be vulnerable, you're not supposed to depend on anyone else, or be independent. Yet, in recovery, you're asked to do all of those things.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right?
The opposite.
Yes.
The complete opposite of what you learned.
So how is that you're kind of reprogramming yourself in some level?
Yeah.
How is that for you?
Probably more easeful than I thought, and I think it's because I was so desperate for change. I was desperate for a solution that could help me not feel like I had to carry all this perceived weight by myself on my own. Because that's really what it was. For me, the alcohol and the drug use were symptoms of a bigger issue, which was I didn't know how to identify and process my emotions, and when they got too much, I wanted to run. I wanted to just escape, and the easiest place for me to escape to was a bar. And ironically, as personable as I am and very social, it was the perfect place for me to hide in plain sight. Right? I can look like I'm amongst the people, and I can isolate just the same, right?
Absolutely.
And it was just the perfect thing. Plus, with my my job and what I do, it just natural. It was too natural, So no one thought any wiser of it. And it was the perfect cover. But that was what I realized over time, was that I was carrying all this emotion. Never once identified what the feelings were. Never expressed or had a place to talk about them. Was very fearful of talking about them because of the program, of not being seen as attractive, masculine, confident. My whole platform is about confidence. So when I'm not feeling confident, when I wasn't feeling confident, it created a very heavy darkness that I had to carry and try to cover up to the best of my ability. And only so much drinking and drugging can cover that up, So that was a big thing for me. And then when I got into recovery, just the simple idea that, one, I wasn't alone in my thinking, and two, I didn't have to figure this out on my own. And then the third thing is having a higher power. I mean, those three things were game changers for me, And it allowed me to be open, and that desperation gave me the willingness to say, you know what, like, if I could become stronger because there's people around me to support me, I'd rather take that route than try to spend the rest of my life trying to figure it out on my own. Right? And that opened the doors for me.
And it's a safe haven. It's a safe place for you to be able to share.
I can go into any community and share without worrying about being hurt. And as a man, I mean, I don't. There's not a lot of men out there who have access to that, right?
Absolutely.
Now, we had to have terrible bottoms to have the privilege of access to that, right? But the average guy who, we would call it a normal, consumer of mind-altering substances, if you will, a lot of them don't have access to that.
Right.
They don't know where to go. They don't know where to share, who to share with, who to trust with the sharing,
Right.
and how to process these things, because we just weren't taught, and we don't. It's not obvious those tools and those spaces are available.
Right.
You know.
Right. I need to do something about my drinking. I can't continue to live like this.
To be honest, I don't think I did anything. I didn't know what to do. Right. I was at the end of my rope, and I was trying to do various things to control my consumption. It just wasn't really working because I would be triggered. Didn't know how to manage my emotions, and it was just an automatic program. So my last drinking experience, I could only describe it as a manic episode because I wasn't really in my right mind. You know, I walked into a bar totally sober and blacked out, and I don't remember what happened until I came to level of consciousness the next morning, standing outside of my place. And this was after it was very clear that my wife had set a boundary of like, hey, if you come home in the morning, like, I'm not letting you in.
Yeah.
You're not here, you know? And I'm like, oh, jeez. So naturally, I'm thinking I can talk myself back in there. But she, bless her heart, like, held the boundary, you know? And that was big for her. Because that started a shift in the trajectory of her life in terms of her personal growth as well. And then, you know, being totally wrecked, I just went back to the bar and drank myself into oblivion. And then I really blacked out, right? And I think in that moment of blackout, I think God came in and said, all right, this is the moment. He's completely vulnerable. He has no idea what's going on. It's enough. He's done. Let's just grab him, you know? And I remember waking up in the darkness. It was literally dark, and it felt like that was the darkness that I had created for myself over the sequence of years, right? Of just depressive drinking and just isolation and all this stuff. And for whatever reason, I woke up and just did not have any desire to drink. And I remember the first thing I had said to myself is like, I don't have anywhere to go, but I don't want to run. And I don't know how to do that now. And I was very confused by that idea because I always knew how to run away. I always knew how to escape. But it seemed like I was born again now in a world where drinking and escaping wasn't available. And so I had to figure out what that other option was. And it was only 3 days later that I found myself in the recovery rooms. But those first 3 days were just, I mean, I didn't know how to exist. You know, I couldn't recognize. Just to give you a frame of reference, when I ended up staying in a hotel that was like right around the corner from my house, and I walked down and across that intersection thousands of times in my time, you know, in LA. When I came out, I knew what that intersection was. I could tell. I saw the street signs, but it just looked like a different place. And that for me was a telltale sign that maybe I'm different now. Maybe something has changed inside of me, you know. But I didn't know that until I came into the rooms and realized that I had that white light moment, if you will.
And think about the symbolism of that.
Yeah.
It was a crossroad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you had a choice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you took the choice of recovery.
Mm-hmm.
You found the rooms of AA, which I would think that have saved your life.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Describe the man you were before you got sober and the man you are now. How have you changed?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, actually, and a lot of differences. I think in the similarities, very social, very outgoing, described as charismatic, confident, go-getter. I like to hustle, you know. I like to have fun. Smart, intelligent. You know, these are words I've heard, and I also feel like that describes me. And also, like, was a little bit like chameleon-like. You know, I could blend myself into any environment. I was very malleable in the sense of, you know, if I wanted something from you, I can be that person that could get that from you, whether it's talking like you, behaving like you, using similar words as you. Like, I was just the ultimate salesman back then, but for my own personal benefit. And I was a risk taker. I I enjoyed taking risks. I enjoyed putting myself in emotional danger, not physical danger, but emotional danger, like fear of rejection or putting myself in compromising situations just to say that I did and I survived, whether it was talking with girls or talking with other guys or going out and making connections with people and finding the late night parties. Like I was that guy, I guess people would describe me as the mayor of whatever city I lived in,
right.
And in some cities I didn't, because I just had that connection.
And the life of the party?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like I was always, late to the party, became the life, and then I stayed until the end, and I was just the last one to leave, I would say there's a lot of similarities to who I am today. I think what's different is I've learned that confidence is about what I say about myself to other people. I feel self-confident, which is what I say to myself about myself, right? And I was not self-confident back then. I feel self-confident now. I am very comfortable in who I am and how I show up, So being a well-spoken, intelligent black man was something that I was bullied about and made fun of. Now I take pride in it, That's something that it's important to me and allows me to do really well in this world and contribute, I'm much more giving in this world than I was in the other world. I love helping people out, and I think one of the things also is that like I took for granted a lot of the gifts that I felt like God had given me. The awareness, the wisdom, the knowledge, the ability to process things and simplify them, and now I don't. I really revel in that. I love taking complex problems and creating simple solutions for myself, for my family, for other people. I don't take my gifts for granted, and I think that's something that's totally different than who I was before. I took a lot for granted back then. These days, I don't take a lot for granted,
What about expressing emotions, being vulnerable? Obviously, you've gotten over needing to rely on other people. That's what AA is all about.
Yeah.
But what about those? What about that? Dealing with emotions, being vulnerable as a man.
So I learned about vulnerability from the arrogant sense before sobriety. I thought vulnerability was a tool to use to create connection, but for your benefit, right? To look vulnerable, to look confident, right? And it worked for sure. And what I had to do is I had to learn in the rooms. I had to learn what it was like to share my most vulnerable self and to be comfortable doing that, knowing that I couldn't get hurt. Being in the rooms was kind of like my practice ground for learning how to do that out in the world. And then I think for me the ultimate test was learning how to do that in my own home with my wife, with my daughter, right? And being able to show that. And so constantly going to meetings, constantly talking to my sponsor, sharing myself, talking to other men like you, and just sharing myself and getting the feedback that it's good to do those things. Gave me the self-confidence then to go out and start to practice that in my work, practice that with my friends outside the rooms, practice with my wife, with my daughter, because I think prior to sobriety, she had never seen me cry. And then there were a couple of moments, I think my first 2 years, because, when you get sober, it's not all, sunshine and rainbows. Yeah, right, it's all unicorn and rainbows. Like, you go through some tough shit. So, I was going through some tough times, and I remember sitting with her one time, and I started crying, and she was like, "What's wrong, Dad?" And I'm like, "I'm just really sad." She's like, "But you never cry, and that really struck me, And I think there's power in controlling managing your emotions, and I think there's also power in expressing your emotions too, and that was a pivotal point for me to learn how to be able to express that and teach emotions too, right? Like, prior to that moment, I never expressed, identified and expressed an emotion to her like that before. Like, I feel sad, right? Now it's a staple in our home. We identify our feelings and we learn how to process them, So
what a gift! What a gift for your daughter.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the things that we didn't get, and so for her to know that it's okay to express emotions, and it's okay for a father to express emotions.
Yeah,
And
and we try to keep it safe.
Yeah.
Like even if it seems, I mean, she's a kid, so her emotions are volatile
Yeah.
in so many ways because they're underdeveloped.
Yeah.
But now she has a safe place where she can learn about her emotions and then find different ways to process them, so she can get them out of her body.
Yeah.
And we show her how we do it too,
Yeah.
And so it's, I think in sobriety, what I've learned is that a big part of masculinity is being able to have a high level of emotional intelligence, right? Being able to be emotionally literate in terms of understanding different types of emotions and what do they feel like in your body? What are the stories that accompany those feelings,
Right.
and what does it make you want to do? And then learning different ways to process them, so that way you don't end up having it bottled in to the point where maybe you hurt yourself or other people, right? You can take what could be considered, low vibrational energy, and you can alchemize it into high vibrational energy that can help other people.
Absolutely.
But you have to learn, and you have to develop the intelligence, which is through experience.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great way. That's a great way to word it. So your wife knew you before you got sober. So
Yeah.
you were married before you got
Mhm.
sober.
Yeah.
So how has your marriage changed since you got sober?
I mean, she didn't think that we would survive, right? Like that January 13th, this was the day before I got sober. She thought that we were done, I mean, her birthday was January 15th, and so like that was the first time I was not with her on her birthday since we've been together.
Mm-hmm.
So there was just a lot of things where she just thought we were done. And I remember on the 16th, when we were talking, I told her, this is during the time where I felt different, and I didn't know how to really explain it, but I just told her, I know that I've completely destroyed everything, and I know that right now I feel really different than who I was before, and I know that like I could turn this around, and this is another practice of vulnerability. I told her, what I'm really scared of is I don't know if you're going to like the person that I think I'm going to become because I need to take this path.
Right.
And, we're both crying, and she said in turn, she's like, well, I know that I need to be different too. I know now through this experience that like I have to be a different person too, and I don't know if you're going to like me, based on who I become.
Right.
So we came to the decision that we were just going to reset our marriage.
Yep.
That we're just going to start from zero. Like, hi, I'm introducing myself again, right? Like, let's go on a date,
awesome.
right? Let's go on a date. Let's start that process over again from scratch. And, my daughter was a year and a half at the time, so not fully aware, but probably cellularly aware of all this, but it was a pivotal point, of just deciding, what, we're going to start from scratch. And if we get to a place where we don't like each other, at least we can say that we tried this new way.
Right.
But let's really give it a shot, And I think that's what saved our marriage.
That's awesome. And so basically, you're going to be growing together.
Yeah.
Right? And that might mean you grow apart,
Mm-hmm.
or you take the same trajectory. And that sounds like what happened. That's a beautiful story. That's great. I like the fact that you said let's start over.
Yeah.
Day one. This is it.
It was totally, I mean, I forget the exact words I said, but basically I was just like, the marriage that we have is done. Or something along the lines of that. Like, whatever we had, it's over. It's done. That's the cutoff date. We have to build something new.
Yeah.
We have to redefine what marriage is for us. And I don't know, she took it. She took it, and it worked. And listen, like, if she were here, she would say it was one of the better decisions that we had both made together.
Right.
And she's very happy with where things are,
That's awesome. As you were telling the story and how you had to start again, at any point early in that process, did you grieve having to let go of the old person or the old life?
I think I was grieving. It's a great question. I think what accelerated my path to what we know as recovery and sobriety, this new life for me, was because I was grieving an old version of myself. When I found out that I was going to be a dad, that was what changed everything for me. You know, the guy that I was, I knew was going to die or died that day. Who knows, right? Yeah. And I spent the next year and a half, well, plus, so probably 2 years at that point, 2.5 years, grieving the death of that identity with no end in sight. I was just grieving and grieving and grieving. And it wasn't like I didn't want to be a dad. I wanted to be a dad since I was a teenager, since I can remember, you know? But the reality of the change in who I was going to become, and at least the perception of that, it was just too much for me at that time. And I couldn't handle it. And I just remember there was a lot of times where, like, because I couldn't handle it, I acted very immaturely during my wife's pregnancy, and there was a lot of isolation and abandonment on her end. And I think for her, I can't imagine how difficult it was to be pregnant and not have that other person there the way that you wanted, him to be, and then to continue that behavior, like, in the first, year of my daughter's life. I mean, it was tough. It caused a lot of trauma for both of us, and and I remember talking to my therapist. So one of the things that, there was one other thing that I did that helped me understand my emotions more was working with a therapist. And, highly recommend it. I also worked with a psychiatrist as well, because I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I was mentally ill. I wasn't sure what was going on with me. I didn't know what I needed. So me being a very heady person, I figured I'd go down all avenues and just have conversation and see what's going on. And I want to share two very important lessons I learned from both of them. From the psychiatrist, I remember him asking me, he's like, "Do you feel you need medicine or medication?" I said, "Honestly, Doc, I have no idea. I've never even considered the idea that I would need it, but I also didn't think I'd be here." So I don't know, right? And he broke it down to me, and he said, there's 3 stages of change, personal change, right? And if you want to, and he spoke about it in the context of mental illness. He said, the first change that needs to happen is your lifestyle. You got to change your lifestyle. So if there's things that are contributing to that illness, you have to eliminate it from your life. Sometimes that's all you need, right? Sometimes it's not enough. Then you go to the level 2 change, which is therapeutic, right? Could be seeing a therapist, could be all these other types of therapies that are out there, which is awesome. One I'm going to share in a moment. And then the third one, if those 2 fail, would be medicinal intervention, right? And that is, like, absolutely necessary, right? Like, if we don't medicate, this could go off the rails, right? And when he described it to me like that, it made sense that I wasn't level 3, right? Level 2 needed to be considered, but level 1 had to be done, right?
Yeah, so you're kind of doing you start at step 1.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
See how that goes, and then if you need to go to step 2, do that, and like you said, you'll know if you need step 2.
Absolutely.
Right.
So started to make some changes just in my personal life around dieting. This was around the time where I tried to control my drinking. So there were ups and downs with that, as I'm sure you know. And I started to see a therapist. And then his therapist is amazing. I mean, I only saw him maybe 8 or 9 times, but he really helped me understand how I process things. And he taught me cognitive behavioral therapeutic technique. And it was about understanding the thought, feelings, and behavior cycle that exists in us, where we usually think that our feelings are what causes our behaviors. And that's only partially true. What happens before our feelings are our thoughts, right? And if we're not mindful, there are what's considered thought errors that can come up. So, for example, black or white thinking, as in like all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, pedestalizing, right? Complete detachment, thinking. There's like more than 20 different types of thought errors. It's pretty amazing. And that triggers certain feelings, which then, if you're not able to identify or manage, it leads to then what could be harmful behavior. So he taught me that. And then he taught me a technique where if I can figure out the thought that caused this chain reaction, and I can find a way to dismantle that thought, right? Because part of the reason why I may feel or behave that way is because I believe that thought to be true. So I need to create a scenario where that thought isn't true, that there's some crack in the armor of that thought, so I can try to dismantle it and replace it with a new thought that can then create new feelings, and then that can lead to new behaviors. And I had to practice this on my own, and with his help. And it changed my life because it allowed me to identify my thoughts. It allowed me to identify specific feelings. And then it gave me an opportunity to think about what behaviors are associated with certain feelings, so I can better manage how I respond in situations as opposed to react in situations. And it was a huge game changer.
So the emotions, the feelings are actually the barometer that tell you whether your thoughts are in alignment or not.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't understand that. Right. I was totally, and even in my early stages of sobriety, I was totally just behaving based on feelings. You know who do that? Kids. Kids only behave purely based on feeling. They don't pause to think about things, right? And so that's when I realized, man, I've been acting like a child. My wife has been taking care of 2 children, like unaware, right? Completely unaware. And so by default, by that perception, she's alone in the raising of the household. Right. And that's when I started to realize, no, I got to go on this journey to develop the skill sets to get to my place where I get back the respect from my wife, I get back the attraction from my wife, and I get back the leadership of the house. You know, and it was a gradual path, you know, but that was super important. And this is when I started to really understand, masculinity. This is where I just started to understand, divinity as it's related to the different energies of masculine and feminine energy, and how we both embody those things, and how to utilize both, right? Because I can be masculine all the time, but that may not be something that always supports my wife, right? And so I need to understand how to then use what's considered feminine energy or feminine attractors that's going to allow her to feel comfortable and safe around me, So it all started from me understanding that cycle and having that tool to repattern myself so I can show up better for the house.
Right. So you changed the lifestyle, the drinking.
Yeah.
Got involved in therapy. What other things did you do for your recovery? I know you talked about your lifestyle, healthy lifestyle. How about men's stuff, any men's work? Did you get involved in any men's groups or anything?
Yeah. So this happened before sobriety and through my first year. I actually joined a group. It was, people may have heard of it. It's Wake Up Warrior. And it is still led by Garrett White, founder of it. And he has a very militaristic style of coaching. And I needed that because I needed the discipline. I needed the in-your-face, stop lying, tell the truth, be the man, but be the man not in the way that you were programmed to do, but learn the skill sets that allows you to be the man in your life, in your marriage, in your house, and in your business. Right? And that was really powerful for me. I remember seeing his ad. I was wasted in the middle of July on the couch because I didn't want to go into the bedroom because I felt ashamed of myself getting home so late. And I'm scrolling on Facebook and I see his ad and it's like he's talking to me. Great marketer, by the way. But I love the guy. Yeah. He kind of shaped the path that I feel like contributed to getting to that place where I then was able to get sober. Because I had some of those embedded skill sets that I learned from him, but I couldn't really piece it together until I stopped drinking, Because it was working. My wife would see it. I would make progress for like 80 days, 85 days. It looks like it's going to, catch on. And then I'm away for a weekend, and it's just like not even back to zero. It's back to negative. You know what I mean? And so that's when I was like losing credibility. I was losing trust in the house. Right. So one of the key things that recovery has been able to do for me is to keep things simple by taking things one day at a time and having the compound effect of that philosophy show that I can now create consistency, which breeds trust and allows me to be reliable, which means now my wife can come to me when there's issues knowing that I'm not going to run away, right? And I think a lot of it had to do with, I think a big part was learning how to set my life up with some more structure. So not just morning routines, right? Because that can kick off my day, but like daily routines that keep me focused and dialed in throughout the day. What are some ways to process my thoughts, feelings, and behavior in a way that can help me? I think Garrett helped me a lot with that. And how do I set up my life where I can pursue things that I've always wanted to pursue, and how do I accelerate that path? I think, my wife, she would be the first to say, who I am today is unrecognizable to the person that I was 5 years ago. But I think she would argue that still is the case even a year ago. Because I've been able to compound the effect of just sticking to one day at a time and just showing up not just for her, but actually more importantly for myself. Right? Like, as I'm building integrity with myself, which I think is a very important masculine value.
Absolutely.
Right? Is like, if I can build integrity with myself, then I'm more likely to tell someone I'm going to do something and actually follow through with it because I don't want to break that integrity with myself. It has nothing to do with the other person. So then it becomes easy to show up for my family because I know that I have integrity myself to do so. And it just alleviates the conflict of whether or not I can do it. There's not even a conversation. I'm just going to do it because I've built that integrity through consistent daily action.
Your health regime. Do you have a health regime? Do you have a way you start your day? And talk about that?
Yeah, man. My physical fitness journey has been pretty awesome. At least for me in terms of how I got back. So I remember when I got sober, I was almost 200 pounds, which doesn't seem like a big deal because I'm 6 foot, so I can fit 200 pounds in the frame. But I was very inflamed. I was very puffy, right? And I think when I was sober, I lost approximately like 30 pounds in 3 months, just from not drinking, and then all the extra that came with it, right? So bad eating decisions, right? That usually came with that, and just like I said, inflammation, dead weight that I was just carrying around. And so that was really good, and I really focused a lot on my personal fitness until a few years ago, when I was paying attention to stories that were going on in my head, and there was one story about working out where I said, I can't be in the same shape that I was back when I was in my early 20s, I can't, I'm not a runner, I don't run. And so I just challenged myself to, first of all, run. I ran a mile a day. My challenge was to run a mile a day for at least 80 days. I got to 83, which was awesome. So just to convince myself, right? Just to break that story. And then going to the gym. So I have a good friend of mine who I consider a mentor, and he gave me a workout plan. I started to work out, and I just saw explosive growth there. And then this year in particular, I'm focusing a lot on my nutrition. And just this week, so to give you a little bit of context, so I have family history of high blood pressure. And based on what I've heard from so many doctors, that I'm pretty much destined to take this medication for the rest of my life. Well, in sobriety, I just noticed that my blood pressure was just going down naturally because I'm not drinking alcohol anymore. And there was one doctor I saw, because every doctor I asked, they were like, probably not. Like, you're going to take this forever. And one doctor was like, I think if you continue to optimize your lifestyle, like, you can have a chance, And that was all I needed to hear, And I just, I was like, when I'm ready for it, I'm ready to do it. And so this was the year where I said, you know what, I'm pretty much at the point where I can at least try, right? And so I changed my diet to be very high protein, low fat, not just to trim the fat off my body, but I think there was something in my intuition. I do not know if this is actually true, so don't take this as medical advice. But there was something that made me feel like the fat had something to do with my blood pressure, with the amount of fat that I was consuming. And so I've really changed that. I'm measuring my blood pressure since, and for the first time in, 15, 20 years, I'm at normal blood pressure without medication. So that for me is a huge personal milestone. I'm still going to keep an eye on it just in case, if things stay consistent. But when I wake up, man, I try to wake up before everyone else does, just because that's really the only time I have to myself. And so I pray. I thank God for waking me up and giving me the chance to do something today, to ask Him to help me help other people, and to remove defects of character that can hold me back or interfere with my ability to do that. And then I go and I work out. In my room, in my living room, I do a body weight workout. And then I meditate. And then I journal. And I journal using the same technique we talked about, the thoughts, feelings, behavior, the CBT technique. And I basically created my own chat bot, basically, that talks with me. It's like, the best way I describe it is like, if my ego and my soul were to have a conversation, what would it look like, right? And I oftentimes go in with the ego, right? And then the chatbot will communicate the questions in a way that allows me to then hear what my soul has to say and come up with a new story that can allow me to move forward. And so it's great when I'm feeling a lot of intense emotions that are based on stories that are not true, but I need to express it, right? And so when I get to express it and I get my feelings out, the chatbot usually just says, like, is this true? And I'm like, no, it's not true. Like, and then what's possible if it's not true, right? And now I'm turning into the possibility of things. So it's really good. I do that. And then I do Neil Patricia, author of, I believe, The Happiness Equation. He has what's called basically a 2-minute morning. So I actually incorporate that, which basically is one thing I'm willing to let go. It's my version of this, but one thing I'm willing to let go today. 2 things that I'm grateful for, and then 3 things that will allow me to feel victorious when the day's done.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then I'm ready to go.
That's great. The health and wellness is something that I help men with.
Mm-hmm.
You're hitting you're checking a lot of the boxes, and I think the foundational practice that I educate men about is nutrition, exercise, hydration, sleep.
Yeah,
right?
Sleep is huge, man. I have my Aura ring.
Yeah.
That was actually my first journey into wellness, was my sleep, because I thought I had sleep apnea, and I got tested, and I was given a mild sleep apnea. So I was sleeping with the CPAP, and that did not equate to sexy time in the bed. So I had to kind of consider, like, is there another way, right? Is there something that I'm eating? Is there something about the conditions of the room that's not allowing me to sleep well? So then I got the Aura ring, and it allowed me to track and see what was going on. And there was some core things. One, I didn't have blackout curtains. I was exposed to sunlight, so I have blackout curtains and a mask. I try to dial down the temperature. My wife's very sensitive to cold temperature, so I just wear less clothes, and I keep my feet out to regulate my heat. But that's allowed me to rest. But more importantly, I've kept a consistent wake-up schedule. So I do keep a consistent sleep schedule, but I'm very lenient and flexible with when I go to bed. But I do my best not to be flexible for when I wake up. So 6 days out of 7, I'm up at 5:30. And that changed for me. And then going to, so that means I traditionally go to bed around like 10, right? So it gives me about 7.5 hours of sleep. That was the biggest game changer,
And then also screen time. You want to stay off screen time, like an hour or 2 before.
I'll admit I don't. I don't. But I don't. Whatever. I'm usually reading, so I'm not like looking at content that's overly stimulating. I lower the screen temperature and the lightness, so that way it's not intense on my eyes, and I'm reading something that is going to actually relax me. It's not going to keep my brain activated, when I'm going to bed. And so I'm fortunate in that way, where I can just, once I'm ready to go to bed, I pretty much just am out. My wife can't do that. It takes her a little bit more time.
Yeah, my wife's the same way.
Yeah.
She could get up in the middle of the night, go use the bathroom, come back, and as soon as her head hits the pillow, she's out again.
Yeah.
For me, I'd be, it takes me a few minutes.
For her, she could be up for an hour after doing that, and she might wake me up on her way to the bathroom, but by the time she's back, I'm already asleep.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about how you're helping men. You're an entrepreneur, and you kind of headed in a niche that I'd like you to talk about. And
yeah, man. So when I started coaching back in 2008, October 2008. So I've been coaching for over 15 years. It's crazy to say. But in 2009, I made it official, and I started a company called The Professional Wingman. Still what I do today. The original purpose was to help men develop the social skills so they can go out to real social environments and make romantic connections with women. And my job was to go out with them to these social environments and give them real-time feedback on what was preventing them from making those connections happen. So that was a lot of fun. I worked with tons of men from, around the country in person, around the globe virtually. Got a lot of recognition for it. I mean, there were some big publications that put me to the test because they just wanted to see it to believe it. Yeah, right? So, the Wall Street Journal was one of them. Washington Post was another one. Boston Globe was another one. MTV was another one. ABC Nightline was another. Like, they all just was like, this can't be real. And then they would all be blown away with what we're able to do just in a matter of a few hours. And so that was amazing. And what kind of started my descent was when I got to peak success at the time. I was on the Steve Harvey show. I think this was 2014. 2014. So I just got married. They flew me out to Chicago, got on the show, crushed it. Even Steve was impressed, which was a big deal to me. And I remember celebrating on a rooftop in Chicago with people I knew, people I didn't know, and I was like, man, I've made it. Yeah. Like, I'm kind of a big deal now, right? I'm making money, I'm young, like, people love me, like, this is great. And that was a goal that I did have, being young, right? And then in the back of my mind, the question was like, well, what now? What do you do? I didn't have an answer. That freaked me out. And I think that was the beginning of my descent and disconnection from that path, because I just got depressed by not knowing where to go with it. And so it was a rocky road. And then it got to the point where going out with my clients was a liability because it just enabled me to drink. So at some point when I got sober, I had to disconnect myself. I had to just say, you know what, like, let me just take some time away from wingman, focus on myself, get healthy, figure out what my next move is. And one of those next moves was to embrace my first true love, which was video games. I actually went to school to be a video game producer. Yeah, I love video games. And at the time, I just couldn't break into the industry, and I ended up starting a professional wingman. So I thought, man, like, I want to pursue being a professional gamer. Like, it's a thing now, Yes, why don't I do it? So I tried the semi-pro route and trained and competed both online and in person. And I did relatively well. I won an online tournament. I placed well in an in-person regional tournament. And the whole experience to me was amazing. And I was thinking to myself, man, I wish life was a game. Like, I would totally crush it. You know what I mean? Like, the whole experience of it was fun. Training, playing, competing, meeting other people inside the gaming community, right? Building relationships. All of it was fun. I didn't even care that I didn't win, right? Like, I cared, but like not. I was proud of myself for the effort.
You enjoyed it.
Yeah. First thing, as a first timer, right? Like, it was my first in-person tournament, and I think out of 120 plus people, I placed 33rd. Like, it was pretty good, So I was proud of myself, and I was like, man, what if I could gamify my life? Like, what would that look like? So I ran home and took my coaching framework and I just put a game design layer over it, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. I wonder if people would like this. And I just saw, studies were coming out around and books were coming out around happiness and performance, and I just saw that game design was the way. That is the entryway to people living happier, more fulfilling lives while increasing their performance, right? And so I went in that direction, worked with a bunch of people, ended up working with a couple businesses, Google being one of them, helping them kind of learn how to adopt a game-like philosophy with their team. And they had great success. A lot of them got promoted inside of that team. And then I just didn't really feel tied to the business side, And I went back to the personal side. And then guys started to reach out to me about wanting to gamify their marriage because they wanted to build a better connection. or save it.
Right.
And I can relate.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so I was like, all right, let's do it. Let's gamify your marriage. And so I had a program that helped guys do that, and I was able to help a few people save their marriage. And then that was when Wingman started to knock on the door again. It was kind of like, you're not done here, man. Like, you're meant to do this, not just for dating, but for for a higher purpose.
Right.
The dating just needs to be, and I was like, I don't want to do dating because I'm not really connected in that way. At least that's what I thought.
Right.
He's like, and then I didn't realize this was me having a conversation with God, right? But he said, it's not about dating. You're using dating as a gateway to people's internal fulfillment,
Sure.
right? Once they achieve what they believe they need to achieve, then you can help them ascend to where they need to go.
Right.
And when I heard that, I felt it. I was like, that's always what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Dating was just to be a gateway to help people get it out of the way, be with someone that they know that they can love and have a sustainable long-term relationship, but then pursue their higher purpose, right? That was really what I wanted to do. And I didn't know how to do it for myself because I didn't understand. That's why I felt lost.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have the higher purpose. So then it came around, and my ego was still a little resistant to the idea of bringing Wingman back. And then I was just like, all right, what would this look like? And so I decided, year 14 going to 15, Wingman's a teenager now. He's a little bit more mature. He's done some things. And so I kind of used that as a great story to bring it back into this holistic process where the motto of the Professional Man now is act, attract, ascend. So in order for if you want your life to change, the first thing you need to do is act.
Absolutely.
Right? You need to take action. And in that action, you're going to attract, the consistent action is going to attract the life and the people that you want in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And then once those people are together, once you're able to have those things because you've become the man that attracts those things, now you can ascend towards your higher purpose.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I completely gutted my programs and built them back up from the ground up using this gamified methodology. And now it's like you can literally gamify anything. I mean, we've tested it. We've gamified dating, we've gamified your marriage, we've gamified spirituality, we've gamified physical fitness, we've gamified mental fitness, we've gamified people's social lives, we've gamified people's performance. I mean, it's been just gangbusters for all the guys who are in it. And so
That's awesome.
it's so, yeah, for me, it's like, this is what I want my legacy to be.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be, and I don't see myself doing anything else, honestly, for the rest of my life. I will be a coach. At least I feel this way. God may have a different path for me, but I just feel like I will be a coach till the day I die. And I want that to be the legacy that lasts generations.
So on some level, you and I are on similar paths, just with different platforms.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you want to help men.
Yeah.
Right? And so you're doing it the way you know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you said something interesting about this process for you. You knew it. You
Yeah.
said, I knew it. And you kind of touched your heart. And it's that piece that a lot of men have disconnected from. It's their intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's their hearts.
Yeah.
And as you get to do this work on yourself, as you know, your intuition becomes clearer, and your heart becomes clearer, and your ability to express love and receive love gets more open.
Yeah. It's a powerful thing. When we talk about masculinity, one of the things that I always think about is about structure and power when it comes to masculinity. Have you heard the book Power versus Force, David Hawkins?
Yes.
Yeah, so one of my favorite books. And David Hawkins, exceptional individual. And he talks about the consciousness scale. And he talks about how when you're in a reaction, you're low vibrational, you're using force, which is really destructive. And I find that when people think about toxic masculinity, that is what I think about, is energy that is used as force that's destructive. Not all masculinity is toxic in nature.
No.
In fact, most masculinity is strong in nature because it comes from a place of power, which I believe comes from your heart. But the problem is a lot of guys are afraid to go there, even if they don't need to share with anyone else. If they were isolated in a room and they were asked to go into their heart, I don't know if that many people would know how to do that or be willing to. because they might be afraid of what they see.
Right.
I've been there. I was afraid to go into the depths of my heart to see what was there. And what I realized was I was afraid of the power that I would acquire from connecting with my heart, because I was worried that my ego would take it for granted and use it for destruction. And I realized that these are two very different sources of energy, my brain and my heart. So as long as I'm able to communicate, allow conversation to happen between the two, and let the ego know that, you keep me alive in many ways, but you can't have a seat at the head of the table. I'll give you a seat at the table, but not at the head. My heart has to be there, And when your time is called, I will always listen to your opinion. You will always have a voice. You will never need to go into the corner. You are very welcome at this table, but the heart needs to have the final say.
I have rules.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. I mean, if you can have them work together as a team.
I believe that. That's why I'm not a big believer in there are versions of ego death that I believe in, but I don't think that you should. I don't believe in the idea of not having an ego. Because without that, it's very different. I mean, and this is just from my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong here. But I just believe that there's some core part of your ego that you do need that allows you to execute and perform in life, whereas your heart is more of the creator, the visionary of what it is that you want to create. And the heart is also the fire, the motivation, the internal motivation to continue to execute, right? Like your ego, your heart knows that it needs to do it, but your ego needs to think it can do it too, so it can help you.
It helps with the action.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Right? You have to think about, how am I going to make what the heart wants.
Yeah. Because then once you get to a point of attraction, you're not using your brain as much. Now you're more focused in your heart, and that's when the ascension occurs. Right? Like when I stopped thinking about sobriety, not drinking, right? When I stopped thinking about that, then I was no longer in my head.
Right.
It allowed me to be present in everything else that was going on. Right. And when I was in my heart, that's when things opened up for me. My life got bigger. And then it allowed me to realize that, I can ascend by helping other people, right? And so I think everyone has what I call a vision quest, I don't know if you saw the movie 1985. Yeah. So
The Wrestler?
Yeah. It's a great movie. I haven't watched it. Check it out. It's really good. But also the vision quest comes from a Native American ritual where they send their teenage boys out by themselves in the wild to connect with spiritual animals and figure out what their purpose is and how they're going to contribute to society. And I do believe that we all have at least one of those in us, And the question is, are you willing to give it the shot to pursue it, So that's what I want to do. I want to help people pursue their vision quest, have the structure and systems there to support them, but also be a guide in a way to support them and encourage them to fulfill it.
Yeah. You bring up a good point about ritual. I love ritual, and I think it's in our culture it's something we've gotten away from, particularly for young men. There's no rite of passage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about, and this is starting to formulate in my mission, in my process. Things are starting to unfold in ways I didn't imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, first it's like helping men, 45 and older, because that's my age demographic.
Yeah.
But as I'm researching what men in that age group need, and they might need a rite of passage.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm learning is the generation coming up, the 20-something-year-old men, are really struggling.
Yeah.
Big time.
Absolutely lost.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what's starting to come to me is let's get us men in this 45 to 60 or however old they can even be older than that. Let's get them through a rite of passage. Let's get them doing their own work. Let's get them healthier. Then we can help the next generation.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's starting to come to me.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how that's going to happen, what it's going to look like, but
It'll
it's
unfold.
there.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And my daughter's 6 years old, and at some point she's going to go out there and date. And two things go through my mind. One is I want to make sure that I set a good standard for who she allows in her life, not just as a boyfriend, but it could be a boss, could be a teacher, mentor, friend. I mean, I think beyond just like who she's in a romantic relationship with, it's about all men, and all people, really. But the other thing is, part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is because of the next generation. We are lacking a serious hero-making machine here in Western culture.
Sure.
The heroes are influencers, and those are not the same. Because you don't hear about their values. Their values are implied through their actions, and typically their actions are pretty destructive and disorienting for any young man who's trying to figure out what their role is in life. And I think kind of what you're saying is, we need to create more leaders who can be those heroes that they can look up to and try to emulate. And like it or not, there are people who may have very polarizing views, but if their views can inspire, these young men to step up into their masculinity more and be a positive power, not force, but a positive power to society, then let's do that. Let's encourage that and trust that, there's other people around these men that can help them with discernment. Not one guy is going to have the answer to all things, and not one guy is going to do all the right things. That's why we need multiple heroes, because it creates diversity of ideas that one person can then condense into their own way of being and then move forward through life. That's why I love collaboration, because we can have similar views and we can have different views, but they all can mean similar things to one person that they can bring together, right, and form their own path. And so we need more of those. Right.
Yeah, I like the word discernment, and this is the second time it's come up recently. It came up last night in the conversation, and I think that discernment comes from the heart. Yeah. Right. That ability to discern comes from the heart. So you're right. If you're surrounded by, let's say, five men, you're going to take a little bit from each one of them that feels right to you. Yeah. Yep. And then you make it your own. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah.
And that's what it's about, to help these guys come up with what their own philosophy is going to be. I want to use my methodology and my philosophy as a gateway for them to create their own version of it. I don't care about people adopting or replicating my philosophy. That's not the point. The point is it gives them structure for them to create their own, so then they can go out and crush it. Because when it becomes their own, then it becomes even more powerful. Absolutely. Right? And so that's what I want to empower.
Yeah, I mean, it's a ripple effect, and then they're going to pass it on to someone else. A teacher, in my opinion, is someone who teaches, but you want your student to get to a level that higher than you. Yeah. Right? Yep. So then you got to take the ego out of that.
You have to. You have to, man. Yeah. And just to kind of go full circle, right? We talked about at the beginning of our conversation about my upbringing, right? There wasn't a philosophy that was outright told to me, right? Except for the industrialized, so whatever. I want to make sure that, guys that I work with and even my daughter at home, that they have a philosophy that they can develop on their own, And a lot of it will have to do with what I teach them and what I talk about. But at some point, I'm not going to be there. I don't want to be there all the time. And they get to chart their own path. And so I always, when I work with my clients, I tell them, listen, this system is going to help you understand how it works. But then it's going to become, and I give them their name, like name system, or names program. And once it gets to that, you're going to ascend to a whole nother level. And it's yours and yours to keep. No one else can replicate it because it's you who's charting that path, right? And that's the X factor in all of this.
You don't want them dependent on you. You want them to evolve.
Yeah, become interdependent.
Right. Absolutely. So I want to post how people can connect with you, and how would they do that?
So on social media, you can follow me at The Professional Wingman, and then you can also go to theprofessionalwingman.com. Now, if you are interested in wanting to talk about the idea of working together and what a game design could look like for your life based on maybe a vision or a quest that you might want to go on, go to theprofessionalwingman.com/apply and you can schedule a time for us to connect.
I'll post that in the comments. And this is an awesome conversation.
Love it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that I had you on as a guest, and I'm sure it's going to impact a lot of men that will be listening to this. So, if you liked this, check out my video on men and alcoholism, and I'll see you there.